Festive greetings, one and all. It's new iPhone season, that time of year when the arrival of new fruit-themed telephones draws excitement from the rabid Apple fanbase, insufferable tech pundits on social media, and let's face it, anyone with more disposable income than sense. Okay, so it's been a good few years since semi-normal folks were regularly queuing outside Apple stores on iPhone launch day, but still, the iPhone is arguably the most successful product of all time, so whether we like it or not, a new launch is never not going to be a big deal. This year in particular though, you could definitely argue that for a sizable chunk of what's new in the 16 Pro series, Android has already beaten Apple to the punch, sometimes by a decade or more. So let's celebrate the September silly season in tech with a look at the new features in the iPhone 16 Pro that Apple has borrowed from Android. This is one of the most meaningful iOS changes in years to a part of the OS you'll use every day. If you haven't used an iPhone recently, then you might be surprised to hear that right up until 2024, you couldn't have any white space on your iPhone home screen. If you tried to create some, your icons would simply bubble into place to fill any remaining gaps. One of the lesser revolutionary changes added in iOS 18 is the ability to just have a gap on your home screen if you want. Imagine that. You can switch to large icons without labels too, something Android custom launchers have been offering going back to like 2010, and there are new options for icon backgrounds in dark mode. Plus, the tinted color options seem to take some inspiration from Google's Material You on its Pixel phones, letting you choose a matching or complementary color for your app icons. Some of these definitely look a little better than others. I'm not too sure about this brown tinted version that Apple's using in its official promos here, but I guess it could be worse. Definitely looks like a theme I would have run in Launcher Pro on my HTC Desire back in the day. Pretty funny how we're seeing this arriving now as opposed to, any point in the past 15 years. Meanwhile, the ability to hide or lock certain sensitive apps catches iOS up to where many Android skins already were. OnePlus introduced its hidden space in 2018 with the OnePlus 6 running OxygenOS 8, which works in pretty much the same way. Apple has always resisted the pull towards ever faster charging speeds that we've seen in parts of the Android world, instead pushing its own Qi 2 standard, aka MagSafe, in its own phones. That's finally changing somewhat in the 16 series, as the new phones are rated to charge up to 45 watts versus the previous 15 series which maxed out at 29. This is of course a big difference on paper, but we'll have to wait and see how these speeds play out in reality and how much time they save charging these new iPhones from 0 to full. There are of course always trade-offs when it comes to battery capacity, charging speeds, heat, and battery aging, and Apple has always leaned more towards maintaining battery longevity over time, even at the cost of performance on some older phones. Either way, Android phones have been pushing more than 45 watts for 6 years already. The Oppo Find X in 2018 was the first to top 50 watts, and these days that's not a remarkable amount of juice to be pulling down for a flagship Android handset. And this might seem like a trivial issue, a matter of a few numbers here or there, but when you can get pretty much a full day's charge from dead in something like 30 minutes or so, that's a big quality of life improvement and something that's been missing from all iPhones so far. So let's wait and see what that 45 watts actually gets us in this next generation of iPhones. Now, physical camera control buttons on phones are actually older than smartphones themselves. On the Android side, just from memory, Sony dabbled in physical two-stage shutter keys for its smartphone since at least 2011's Xperia Arc. And the camera-centric Galaxy Zoom series briefly had physical controls for controlling focal length as well as focusing and taking a shot, much like a point-and-shoot camera. What Apple's doing with the camera control key on the iPhone 16 Pro series is a little different, more akin to a MacBook trackpad or digital crown than a true physical clicker. But the concept is much the same, an extra doohickey along the top frame of the phone to help you frame and take photos more easily without fumbling around with on-screen controls. Once again, Sony, for what it's worth, has doubled down on camera shutter keys of late with its Xperia 1 series that also incorporates a lot of other elements of the company's alpha camera experience, and no doubt we'll see some copycats on the Android side if Apple's camera control system becomes popular. So I'm kinda torn on this one. It's one of those examples of Apple definitely not being first, but arguably having a much more creative approach than just incorporating another button on that outer edge. So 4K 120, and with video, the more frames per second you capture, the less time you have to absorb light in each frame, and the smaller your image sensor, the less light you capture in any given amount of time. So doing 4K video at 120 FPS on a smartphone with a tiny sensor while maintaining any kind of decent image quality is gonna be tough. Nevertheless, Apple isn't first here either. Once again, it's Sony. 2020's Xperia 1 Mark II debuted this feature on its primary camera, though yeah, judging by some of the sample footage you see from 4 years ago online, you definitely need a good amount of natural light, or alternatively a professionally lit soundstage, to get the most out of this feature. One of the possibilities Apple might be doing some AI magic to interpolate frames in some cases, where it's not possible to get a decent video shot at 120 right off the sensor. Nothing has been announced so far to suggest that's the case, but it's a possibility. We've seen Huawei, Samsung, and others use similar tricks throughout the years. So yeah, when it comes to actually decent, usable 4K 120 footage from a sensor of the kind Apple's using, I'll believe it when I see it. And there's a reason many Android phones, even the likes of Oppo, which use much larger image sensors, aren't shooting video at 4K 120 just yet. Android phones like the Google Pixel 8 Pro and Galaxy S24 Ultra were first with new generative AI features in the past year. And going back even further, the Pixel 6 series introduced Magic Eraser way back in 2021. That's the feature that lets you selectively remove photobombers or other unwanted elements in your shots. Apple Intelligence is of course the big new system-wide AI carnival that'll arrive first with iOS 18.1, and that'll take some time to dig into as we weigh it up against Google AI and of course Gemini on various Android phones. But what's not debatable is that Apple's pretty darn late to the party when it comes to AI photo editing features. The Apple Photos app is only now getting features like Magic Eraser that were available on Pixels 3 years ago. And even then, the pre-release version of this cleanup feature has a tendency to conjure up some real nightmare-fuel results depending on what you tag for erasure. Elsewhere, Galaxy AI and Pixel Studio on Samsung and Google phones have their own version of the Image Playground feature that'll be coming later this year to Apple Intelligence. And it's a similar deal for the writing features built into the Samsung keyboard as well on its latest phones, though once again these can produce responses that are a little weird or tonally off. What can I say? AI on phones is still in quite a nascent and messy stage right now. Finally, 2024 is turning into something of a mini renaissance for small smartphones, and Apple is joining the party with the iPhone 16 Pro, bringing the folded Tetra Prism telephoto from last year's Pro Max to both sizes of the Pro in 2024. That means the same quality of telephoto whether or not you're choosing the bulkier handset. I've had plenty of criticisms of that telephoto over the past year or so, especially in daylight conditions where it gets trounced by much of the Android competition. Nevertheless, it's the same zoom quality regardless of your choice of phone size, which is more than you could say for the iPhone 15 series. But if we're talking about features Android already has, Google has technically beaten this generation of iPhone to the punch with the Pixel 9 Pro, which offers the same camera system and spec sheet in both the small and big configurations. As far as I'm aware, this makes the Pixel 9 Pro the only small form factor phone, besides the iPhone obviously, to boast a proper big boy 5x periscope telephoto lens. Everything else with this kind of camera hardware has been around the 6.5-inch size range or above. And let's face it, given the lack of telephoto hardware changes in the 16 Pro, my money would still be on the Pixel producing better zoom shots in any case. Look, it's a well-known fact that Apple is rarely first with new smartphone or computing features. Instead, generally when it enters a new market or introduces a new capability, it brings its own spin on things. And it's easy, and I would say enjoyable, to make fun of something like the Apple Vision Pro, but there's no denying it's unlike any other VR or AR headset. On the other hand, the lack of certain stuff like basic home screen customization options in iOS is pretty baffling, and could be a real pain point for folks switching from Android. In other areas, the camera control key, for example, is genuinely different and innovative and potentially a really handy addition for photographers. In other areas, not so much. Apple was late to the party with periscope telephoto, and its 5x shooter still appears to lag behind the likes of Google and Samsung, to say nothing of its Chinese rivals. There is still some amazing tech being used in rival smartphones that Apple hasn't adopted yet for whatever reason. Whether it's just yields, remember the sheer number of components required for something shipping in a flagship iPhone is going to be considerable, or perhaps just other manufacturers might have exclusivity deals in place on certain hardware. One such hardware feature I'm amazed has eluded Apple this time around is the reflection-canceling coating used by the screen of Samsung's Galaxy S24 Ultra, which makes a huge difference to daylight visibility. And on the software side, Apple has still resisted adding fully-fledged multi-window support to iOS more than 12 years after phones like the Galaxy Note 2 debuted it on the Android side. Perhaps an effort there not to cannibalize iPad sales too much. So does it really matter that Apple isn't first with new smartphone features? Share your thoughts down in the comments. For me personally, it'll be great, I think, to finally have quicker charging and semi-decent telephoto in a smaller iPhone for the first time. So stick around and subscribe for our full coverage of the iPhone 16 Pro and Pro Max when they land. That's it for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.